part of Locked On Sports Atlanta on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
The Hawks Postcast, your home for the best Atlanta Hawks talk. It's quick hitting, local insight after every game. You can't get anywhere but here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me is NBA and college basketball analyst DeShaun Tate. The Hawks Postcast is also part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. And the Hawks are heading into 2026 on a high note. We'll give you our takes on how they got there in a monster 126-102 win over Minnesota. So let's get into it. DeShaun, I feel like this has been such a long time coming because the Hawks have had ups and downs, mostly downs, if we're being honest, where it was L after L after L, 7 straight to be exact. And there were some in there where the Hawks were right in it. And unfortunately, they couldn't close the deal in the end. There were some where, hey, they were out of it from the beginning. This was actually a game where the Hawks dictated the pace. The Hawks dictated everything, really, from the opening tip. And it might be because of your take that a difference a center makes is a big difference.
Yes, it is. And listen, I mean, I have talked so much about Kristaps Porzingis.
Yes, you have, sir. Yes, you have.
And I know that there's circumstances that come behind that as well.
Yes, there are.
I get that part too. But definitely eating a little bit of crow, eating my words, which, as you know, I'm always happy to do. And we love eating crow whenever we can be proved wrong about something for at least one game. Hopefully that'll extend into the calendar year of 2026. But I think that's kind of where it all kind of started, when you start putting yourself in a position where you start knowing that you're kind of getting healthier. And that's not just any piece of a team. That is a huge piece. That's the center position. That's where you're hanging your hat on a lot of the interior play, rebounding. And I mean, you even go and look at the paint points on tonight. Not that Kristaps Porzingis is this big anchoring guy in the paint all the time, because we know that he stands on the outside and shoots a lot of jump shots. But because you have a statue under the rim, that kind of puts the opposition in position to where they have to kind of think twice and hesitate before they go in there against the trees, pun intended, playing the Minnesota Timberwolves. So great game for him on tonight. 16 points, 50% from three, 50% from the field, all of those things. I think for me, in addition to that, is where you factor in some of the things that I really thought the Hawks needed to get a win on tonight. A fast start for Zachary Risachet, who had been struggling. We know that he's been in conversations amongst other things, but while you're here in a Hawks uniform for however long that is, we need you to play well and get off to a fast start. So they were able to do that. He was able to do that. And I thought that they needed to bring some energy. The energy needed to be the difference. It felt very much like a very different energy in State Farm Arena. Maybe they should tip all their games at 3:00. But it was impressive because they didn't allow the Oklahoma City Thunder to kind of make or break things for them. It was kind of like an overflow from a game that they competed very well against. And I thought they needed to prevent Julius Randle and Naz Reid from combining for 35 to 40 points. They held them to 25 collectively. All of those things, I think, is ultimately why we saw the Hawks win tonight.
And that is a very fair point that you make about some of the good things that you saw in the Hawks game against the Oklahoma City Thunder, particularly in them fighting back in that third quarter. Although the game didn't turn out like the Hawks wanted it to, there were some good things that obviously were able to spill over into this game. But instead of starting those things in the third quarter, you really saw the Hawks begin to set the stage and set the tone from the beginning. And look, there are 2 names that you called out. I'll start with your take, which of course is Kristaps Porzingis, and then I'll move on to Zachary Risachet, just a quick point on him. But with Kristaps, again, just having that 7-footer inside just to make Julius Randle think twice or second guess himself in terms of what he was going to do inside, making Naz Reid think twice, think twice, and just making that entire team know that there's presence on the inside, even if Kristaps Porzingis was only in the game for 17 minutes, but 16 points in 17 minutes, pretty darn impressive. A couple of boards, if you will. And just, again, I think overall presence and knowing that, hey, you don't have to rely on Onyeka Okongwu and Jalen Johnson to do the work. That it just felt like there was such a heavy workload on them in the absence of a true center, regardless of whether he came in on a minutes restriction, if you will. But yeah, I felt like it allowed Onyeka to play a little more freely. That's why I felt you saw him get his 17 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists, and it's a very efficient night, 6 of 13 shooting. Jalen Johnson, I know we'll talk about him in a minute, so I actually want to hold him, if you will. But for Zachary Risache, the numbers don't necessarily indicate that he had a great game, just 9 points on 4 of 10 shooting, but he did have 4 rebounds. And the fact of the matter is, honestly, you haven't even seen that combination from him in a while.
That's
the
right.
activity, I felt like there was movement and motion, and that was one of the reasons you and I were questioning whether or not he should be in the starting lineup, because we really weren't seeing the attack that was needed at either end of the floor. We weren't seeing sort of that athleticism and everything that you would have thought a number 1 pick in his second season would be showing you. So yeah, I felt like that was a nice little aside for him, and we'll see. The most recent report that came from the Athletic, Sam Amick, by the way, said that the Hawks are vehemently saying we are not looking to move on from Zachary Risache or have him packaged in a trade. Now we shall see, because when the rubber hits the road and you get to those final talks with other teams, we'll see how that goes. But for now, that's where the Hawks are standing on it. And even our own guy, Brad Rowland, who of course is over at Locked On Hawks, intimated the same, that is what the Hawks are indicating. So we shall see how it goes. But for me, my take was, hey, you didn't force 17, but still forced a W. And there's a trend that we've seen for the Hawks this season. 10 wins, 10-4 to be exact, when they force at least 17 turnovers. That's kind of that number for them. And although they only forced 16, they were right there at that point. And for me, it was how they got there. DeShaun, I saw active hands and I saw movement on the defensive side for the Hawks from the opening tip. That's what was impressive about me. So yes, it was only 16 versus that sort of cowbell 17, if you will, that bell toll, but they got 19 points off those 16 turnovers. And that's a good sign for the Hawks, because we know that they've been turning the ball over with double digits with opponents, but weren't able to capitalize on it. So I thought it wasn't just about the number of turnovers that they created with the Timberwolves, but it was also about the fact that 2 things. Number 1, they were creating those turnovers early because we saw active hands. And I think the other piece is that the Hawks were protecting the ball themselves. Only 10 turnovers in this game, and they only allowed the Minnesota Timberwolves to score 11 points off those turnovers. And when they were able to turn the ball over, that's when we saw the fluidity in the offense. 38 assists tonight. So forcing those turnovers, more indicative of an all-around game for the Hawks than just the 16 that we saw in that column.
It was. And I think that's what's impressive, is that, you know, for a team that had been doing so well from a defensive standpoint, and then, you know, had some moments this year, especially on the losing streak, where they just really didn't look all that great. We go all the way back to the game against the Chicago Bulls, where they scored, feels like, 1,000,000 points against the Atlanta Hawks. And, you know, all of those things, everything starts with being able to get stops. You're able to get stops, and then that works into the flow of your offense.
Yeah.
Sometimes winning the game is not always about having more points at the end of the game than the other team. Sometimes it's about being able to put the opposition in a position where they just cannot put the ball into the basket. And that's what they were able to do. And it felt very free flowing. And, you know, I know that there's always and forever going to be this narrative about how when a team is able to win basketball games without Trae Young, yep, I said it, let's finally address the elephant in the room, for crying out loud, then it's going to almost look as if, well, plus they were able to get stops. That wouldn't have been happening if Trae was on the floor or whatever, what have you. But I will say enough to say that no matter who is on the floor, you got to go out there and get those stops. And it has to start with that in order for your offense to really get rolling, for your offense to really be able to gel. This is, if not the best performance from the Hawks that we've seen all season is definitely up there in that conversation. Of course, it also helps when you can limit Ant-Man, Anthony Edwards, where we know it was a homecoming for him. 1-5 record in his career at State Farm Arena. So that's always a great thing to be able to say against one of the NBA's top premier elite players in the league.
Indeed, indeed. So what was the turning point in this game? There were so many, but there was one in particular that we'll talk about up next. This episode of our Locked on Hawks postcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Fridays already feel different during basketball season, and FanDuel is making them even better. Every Friday night before the games tip off, FanDuel gives fans a new way to kick off the weekend with NBA Happy Hour. NBA Happy Hour is your official pregame, a limited time window where special offers drop right inside the FanDuel app before the action starts. Fridays from 6 to 7:30 Eastern have become appointment viewing with NBA Happy Hour. Opening the FanDuel app during Happy Hour always brings something new: boosts, bonuses, and surprises. It's easy to check the weekly special before tip-off and make a move before the window closes. So before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping down during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. A little basketball, a little action, and a whole lot of Friday energy. That's NBA Happy Hour, only on FanDuel, the official sports book partner of the NBA. This episode of our Locked on Hawks postcast is also brought to you by Game Time. During basketball season, there's nothing like being in the building, the energy, the crowd, that first big run that gets everyone on their feet. Fans want to be there for those moments, not stuck refreshing screens or guessing what tickets are really going to cost. That's where Game Time comes in. The Game Time app gives fans the advantage back, making it incredibly easy to score amazing tickets. Fast, simple, and without the guesswork. Browsing the Game Time app is straightforward and intuitive. Finding tickets takes just a few taps. And seeing the view from your seat before buying makes choosing tickets easy and confident. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download the Game Time app today and get in on the action. DeShaun, I don't know if we've done this entire season, but I think it is the entire season or the entirety of the game that we can actually call out. And I'll give our guy, one of our most faithful supporters and everydayers, Robert, I'll give it to you. Tell him what the turning point is, my guy.
Time to reveal where the game was won or lost. It's the turning point.
Robert Blackman, 72-35, said it best. The Hawks led from the start. And DeShaun, you also said it best. It wasn't just about the scoring. It was about the tone that was set at both ends of the court from the tip. That's why I said there are so many turning points, because you can look in almost every statistical category and you can see how the Hawks really did dictate how this game was going to go.
Absolutely. And, I think that that's just kind of the approach and the mindset that I think that this team has to have going forward, whether Trey is on the floor, whether Kristaps is on the floor, whether Jalen is on the floor, no matter who is on the floor.
Yeah.
To, go out there and compete. Not that I feel like they give it any, less than 110% effort most of the time. But sometimes I feel like that energy is what ultimately kind of carries them over. And it was also good that it happened at home. That I feel like this is probably the best win at home. I don't know about on the road or all season, but at home for sure, without question. Yeah. And it kind of really all started for me, obviously, out the gate. But even starting out the game on a 5-0 run right off the tip. And we like to think, oh, it's just a little 5-0 run, whatever, what have you. But doing that and also implementing getting one of your guys like Zachary Resache going, who's been struggling quite a bit than some others, I think was also a really good sign. 5 3-point conversions for the Hawks by 4 different Hawks players and 1 turnover in the first quarter. That alone within itself, I think, is what ultimately kind of set the tone for this team. And I want to throw one other thing out there while we're sitting here talking about this particular game.
Mm-hmm.
While we can definitely give a lot of credit to the front court, Jalen Johnson and Kristaps Porzingis, who combined for 50 points, 12 rebounds, 21 for 34 from the floor, and 50% from 3, 7 assists.
Mm-hmm.
I think that while we haven't talked nearly as much about the bench mob all year long, they probably deserve the most credit. Well, because the bench mob hasn't really been, the bench mob has been more of the starting mob for this team a lot of the times.
Sure.
But from a consistency standpoint, from all guys who are typically guys coming off the bench, Nickeil Alexander-Walker and what he has been for this team all year long. When Trey is not, playing inactive, he's kind of stepped into the role that DeJounte Murray at one point in time had to with leading this team. Ace Newell has been one of the more brighter spots amongst not just rookies, but specifically on this team from a consistency standpoint, knowing what you're going to get from him, regardless how big, how small. Be Krejci from a shooting standpoint,
Sure.
being inserted into that role, starting, coming off the bench, whatever you need him to do, just be ready to pull the trigger.
Yeah.
And then last but not least, Onyeka Okongwu, who's constantly being played with between starting lineup, going back and forth between that and the bench. It has no difference upon what the production is that he brings, regardless as to whether he starts the game or not. All of those guys being bench players for this team, all of those guys bringing some of the biggest contribution and deserve some of the biggest credit for why we've seen this team flourish when we've seen this team flourish.
Yeah, I would say the same. This is a hybrid because Onyeka Okongwu can come off the bench sometimes. Today, he was a starter. Nickeil Alexander-Walker can come off the bench sometimes. Today, he was a starter. So the fact that you see consistency from those two guys in particular, whether you have them coming in with the second unit or they're part of the first unit, is impressive. Nickeil Alexander-Walker with, like you said, an 11-point game today, but 3 of 7 from 3 in particular was impressive for me. And then to see Onyeka Okongwu 2 of 5 from 3, and then to get the type of productivity that this team got off the bench, particularly from 3. And again, 2 of 5 from 3 may not seem like a big deal for Luke Kennard, but it is a big deal because Luke Kennard has kind of gone AWOL, it seemed, here and there.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So for me, I saw a little bit more activity from him. There were a couple times where you could see the plays break down. And those were moments where a week or 2 or 3 ago, Luke Kennard would have had the ball in his hand and the play would have broken down and the Hawks would have had an empty possession, and not today. So I thought that was impressive from Luke Kennard. Also, B. Krejci, only 6 points. But again, the 2 threes he made were on plays that were breaking down deep into the clock. And somehow, some way, B. Krejci gets the ball in his hands and he's able to convert on a 3. So I think he's been impressive and was impressive today. But I actually wanted to talk about Asa Newell in particular because the athleticism and the activity around the rim was what impressed me the most. We already know Asa Newell can get his points. He can get his shots. He only had 7 today, but still, he was off 3 of 5 from the field and 1 3-pointer. But what was particularly impressive for me was 9 rebounds and a steal. 9 rebounds and a steal. This is a guy who we were saying, man, what's going to happen when he starts playing defense, when he starts figuring out how to play defense in the association? Well, Asa Newell is starting to figure it out before our very eyes. So for me, especially being there in person today, had an opportunity to get down to the arena for the first time in a while, been a little bit under the weather. So I kind of pressed my way down there today. And he, for me, might have been the most impressive, especially in the beginning of the game, because I just saw him flying everywhere, and active hands were so important and so critical early in this game to set the tone. And he was right there setting the tone.
I think so too, Tenitra. I think the other thing with him is just the fact that, like I said, the consistency, knowing what you're going to get out of him. And he doesn't really have like many weaknesses. I feel like there's players that on a team that will help you, that will help you lose and won't help you win. There's players that will help you win and also help you lose. Asa Newell brings the kind of production that he's only a player when he gets in the game that will help you win. He doesn't help you lose in any kind of way. He doesn't go out there and try and do things he's not familiar with. Not
really a liability.
Exactly, at all. I mean, he shoots the three pretty well. He's not afraid to mix it up and get it and out there. And if this team is ever in position, ever where they want to go big and get into a lineup, if they absolutely have to, where they have Porzingis out there at center or Yeko Congo at center and Jalen Johnson at power forward, if in the event you absolutely positively have to move Asa Newell to the small forward position, I feel like he has that agility. He has the lateral movement. He has some of those things to where he can go out there and be able to give you some decent minutes at a position where he can keep up on the defensive end and still big enough to be able to outscore some opponents because of his side on offense.
Indeed. So listen, this is our last show of 2025. What's one thing you want to see from these Hawks in the new year?
See from the Hawks in the new year is to stay healthy, just continue to compete. The main thing I think is just to kind of stay healthy for this team. I think if they can do that, they can put themselves in position to be able to give us a little bit more optimism towards what we initially thought that we would get with everyone being healthy, and that's to be able to compete for at least the Eastern Conference Finals on the second half of the season.
I like it. And I'm going to co-sign and say, yes, please stay healthy. I'm just going to sneak back down to State Farm Arena and go ahead and bubble wrap Jalen Johnson for starters and Kristaps Porzingis. I told you.
No, don't forget him.
Right, I got to bubble wrap KP and I got to bubble wrap Double J so that we can get what we want to see, which is hopefully this type of performance on a more consistent basis with this team in the new year. The Hawks Postcast is the #1 place to hang out after every game and is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So remember, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And for more on the Hawks, head over to Locked On Hawks with our guy, Brad Rowland. Happy New Year. We'll see you on the other side.
Happy New Year.